Hi, Misha here. And kind of an informal series going on. First, we looked at the engineers. Then we looked at the Prometheus expedition itself. Now we're going to talk about the black goo's life cycle. The various stages 1, 2, 3, 4. The results, how humans and engineers interfered with it, and how this does or does not tie in to the larger Alien franchise, and give some of my own thoughts and opinions. And of course, we're looking at NECA figures. These are 1/10 scale, essentially 7-inch scale, meaning like the engineer here is about 8 to 8 1/4, maybe 8.5 inches at most tall to be in scale. And speaking of, let's talk about him and our container of his black goo. Well, we'll begin at the beginning, because that's a good place to begin. And here's a different engineer from NECA. This is the so-called battle-damaged one. We'll get back to him in a minute. But what we're concerned about is this canister, this urn, in his hands here. We looked at it briefly in the engineer video. Pretty neat little accessory. Actually has a total of 3 pieces. And you can further pull this out to reveal the ampules. They're all kind of bundled together. Would have been kind of neat if they were separable. There's 5 of them here, but I guess that would have been a little too small. Anyway, these are important to Prometheus, and by extension, the Alien, Xenomorph, even AVP series, because this contains the pathogen, the compound, the black goo. And yes, it has a name. It begins with an A. As much of a memorizer and nerd as I am, I do not have that full thing memorized. I don't really think that's the point. But this compound is meant to accelerate growth, mutation, also spontaneity, and is quite very dangerous, although it's kind of the moniker of to create you must first destroy, although if there's nothing to destroy, it just seems to create. And at the beginning of Prometheus, an engineer drinks a vial of it, and it immediately kills him and causes his body to disintegrate, essentially break down, decay, but also fleck away into airborne and waterborne particles, which ostensibly either starts life on Earth in the film, or takes life that's there and mutates it and spurs on development. Interesting thought. Would have had to have been a very long time ago, because, single-celled life, multi-celled life on Earth, it wasn't recent. But that's kind of the extreme case. If you just down a vial, it will definitely kill you. And he did it, presumably, on purpose and willingly. Can't imagine it was a fun way to go. But then we get to the Prometheus film and our first exposure, pun intended, to it. Meet the so-called Hammerpede. Again, from NECA. This is in what is essentially the creature pack for Prometheus. They didn't call it as such in Wave 2, but it's kind of effectively what it was. This is a worm. Some sources say it was indigenous to LV-223, but considering that Moon didn't really have an atmosphere to speak of, not one conducive to life at any rate, I don't think that's really where the original worm it formed from was from. I think it was something probably the engineers brought there. Because before the humans from Prometheus kind of interrupted the stasis, the temple, at least the one room of the temple, was essentially in suspended animation. But once they kind of break the seal several things begin to happen. Little worms come out, and urns like this, ampules, begin to leak, which actually might be part of the crisis we see in the holographic flashback scenes. Once the goo, the black liquid, combines with the worms, we soon get these hammerpedes. Little ball head, kind of a translucent white skin, which is kind of the pattern we see in Prometheus. That's one that comes in the set. Here's the other one with the flared out head, hence the hammer part. This is in attack mode. And these were quite strong. They were well over a meter long, well over 4 feet long. Kind of a, well, mostly worm-like body. And they do have acidic blood, at least after the mutation from the black liquid. And teeth. These are actually meant to be in the film kind of a fake out for a facehugger, kind of a proto facehugger. It's interesting, they actually created 15 different real world props with some CGI to augment, but they were mostly puppeted, which is neat. In fact, Ridley Scott actually puppeted some of them himself. But originally, the design was to actually be more like a centipede or a millipede with little legs, although the cobra hood, the flare-out head, was always part of the design. But yeah, hence the Hammerpede nickname. The legs are dropped in favor of more of a worm-like, eel-like, or snake-like, body. Which, okay, the designs change over time. But yeah, these were meant to kind of make you think that they were going to be the thing that infected people. At this point in the film, we don't necessarily know what the black goo is or does. It's just kind of there, one of the elements in the temple. So, if the goo touches an animal, it can mutate it, expand it, make it into something quite vicious, carnivorous. By the way, there are very much carnivorous worms on Earth, so sure. What if it makes contact with a human, but it's not just like drinking a whole damn vial like the engineer did? So now we get to bring out Zombie Fifield, who was actually the first one I picked up from the Lost Wave, because, who doesn't like a zombie astronaut, zombie cosmonaut? I thought the concept was cool, and I wasn't disappointed by what NECA did here. Maybe, other people have disagreed, but that's okay. Although this is called in the alien universe an anathema. At least that's kind of the generic name. Specifically, he's a stage 3 anathema. Stage 4 anathema would be when the engineer just drank the goo and basically died and broke apart. Stage 1, though, is maybe represented by our little head here. Well, stage 1 getting into stage 2. This came with the same set as our Hammerpedes, wherever I put them. Where did I put them? Oh, well. And I thought it was neat. This is the head they find in the temple when the engineers have a quarantine break or some other emergency. We see them running again in the holographic scene, and the head gets chopped off. And while the body's in the corridor when they come in, so, aged, they actually find the head on the other side of the door, and it's been preserved. And then they crack it open back in one of Prometheus's science labs, and we get the reveal of the engineer head. And we see, or you see rather, that he's not looking too healthy. Stage 1 of the anathema is just a basic exposure with kind of very small changes in the person, with maybe some floaters in the eyes that are worm-like, or some black veins, but then that will quickly turn into stage 2, which he seems to be here, which turns into a feverish, ill type thing with pain and maybe disorientation, which seems to be where the engineer was at. And of course, it can be stopped if they're killed. There it is. You know, he's here. It's actually because of the goo exposure that his head explodes in the lab when they pump it full of electricity. But if exposure is greater than just a small amount, or if it's left unchecked, we get to stage 3, anathema, the zombie form here, the bestial form. So bringing our Hammerpedes back out. Boop. And what is admittedly a kind of silly scene in the film, Milburn and Fifield depart from the rest of the team, intending to go back to the ship. They get lost, and they encounter the Hammerpedes, and also the leaking goo. This is when Milburn, the biologist, decides to pet one, calling it Pretty. And it responds by clamping onto his arm, breaking his arm. It does not go well. By the way, these from NECA actually, they have a metal rod in them. You can bend them, but because they're getting old, I mean, they're a decade old, I don't like bending them. It's not good for the plastic, the rubber on the outside, so I'm not going to. As I said a minute ago, they're kind of the fake-out facehugger because it attacks him and then actually enters his suit, I'm talking about Milburn, and goes into his mouth. Doesn't seem to do much inside him except eat him. And then it pops back out the next day when the rescue team comes and finds his corpse. But it's directly how our friend Fifield, the geologist, who frankly I like, he's crazy, which is kind of reminds me of a lot of geologists I've met. He does go to help Milburn after getting high, and tries cutting the hammerheads off the Hammerpede, and it sprays acid blood, which punches through his faceplate, causing him to have lacerations, burns on his skin. He falls over, gets into the black goo that's on the floor, and because his skin is already compromised, it lets the black goo into his system quite readily. Not as horrible of an exposure as directly drinking it, but pretty bad, and seems to knock him out or something for a bit, and then he turns into this thing. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about the spaceman suits here, the SE suits, is there is a flashlight on the belt, which is kind of neat. It's glued on, but you can actually kind of gently pry it off and whatnot. But I'm actually glad they glued it on because it's something that could easily be lost. And yeah, he's the same basic body as David again. I actually gave him the axe that Elizabeth Shaw came with, because, I don't know, zombie man with an axe just seems funny to me. And these creatures were pretty, like I said, bestial a minute ago, but they did have some rudimentary intelligence, craftiness, and they were able to use tools, at least knives and things. I thought about giving him a knife because he used one to try to help Milburn, but I don't know. And one thing I will point out about this figure, some people say he does not come with the camera. He does. They can peg onto his helmet or his thing. In the box, the cameras in a small plastic baggie inside the helmet, which is not on the figure. So I wonder if it falls out for a lot of people. I've also seen that some people can't get the helmet on very well. I admit because of the enlarged cranium, it's a little harder. But what you can do, especially considering the helmet is broken, you can actually squeeze it because it's a pretty soft plastic. You can squeeze it side to side and kind of bulge it out in the front just a bit and slip it over that way. And in that manner, I found it goes pretty well. Fifield has a rockin' red mohawk and stuff. He's a character. Again, he's a geologist. They're all a little crazy. And him getting high, like in the film, some people criticize. That's exactly what geologists do. But yeah, this is the zombie form, the enlarged cranium, kind of just bulbous, decaying skin. He disappears for a time, then reappears outside the Prometheus, and they try getting him in, and he runs amok, killing multiple of the crew. He gets run over by a vehicle. He gets shot. He gets hit by a shotgun, and then eventually torched and killed, showing that he has regenerative powers, kind of like the Hammerpede, but probably not a long life. He's kind of mutation run amok. His damaged suit is kind of neat. I like how they kind of glaze the clear helmet to show the splatter of the black goo, presumably his blood in there too. Interestingly, originally the idea with his exposure was to be turning him into kind of a proto-alien, a proto-xenomorph, complete with kind of the elongated head. I'm not sure why it was changed. It does seem like this decision was Ridley Scott's. I think it was when he was wanting to make this less of an alien prequel. That's one thing to note about Prometheus, and something it does suffer from, is Scott wasn't really interested in making it a true alien prequel. He wanted it in the alien universe, absolutely true, but he kind of wanted it to be its own thing. Well, Alien is a known franchise. It's marketable. So the studio really took the alien prequel angle. And so there was a good chunk of back and forth there, and it does show. But either way, yeah, his mutated form. By the way, the original name of the film was actually going to be Alien Engineers, kind of like Alien Covenant later. Boop. Hit you with his axe. He's attacking. I don't know. Like I said, I just thought it was neat. But yeah, I like the figure. It is true the helmet is hard to get on and off, but I don't know why you display it except on, because it's just busted up, gives you a good view of the thing. There's kind of articulation issues with this mold because it's an older one, but it's fine. You're going to pose him. The legs are pretty good. The arms, joints are a little weird. Hands are good, though, for holding things. So yeah, that's stage 2 represented by our head. Stage 3 represented by Fifield. Not really a way to represent stage 4 because you kind of dissolve. What about stage 1 and the consequences? So let's talk about Holloway. So here we bring the so-called last engineer back out. Again, this is the battle damage version. We looked at the regular pressure suit version earlier in a different video. And it's really uncertain what the engineers were afraid of running from in the flashback holograms. But most think it's an outbreak of the liquid, which would explain why it starts leaking when the humans come. Could also be an alien, a xenomorph infestation, or an attack by another engineer faction. Either way, he goes into stasis with a few others, but over the 2,000 years, give or take, he's in his little crypt. He seems to be the only one that survives, hence the name Last Engineer. And he comes out of his sleep in a very grumpy mood, and kind of goes on a murder spree. He hadn't had his coffee yet. I wonder if coffee would keep for 2,000 years on a ship. So that's why we have David's head ripped off in his hands. He rips David's head off. And he kills an old man. Well, a young man in kind of crappy old man makeup. And he tries to go for Elizabeth Shaw, but didn't work. By the way, speaking of Shaw, and that kind of gets me back to Fifield for just a second. His name is Sean Fifield. Just like with the original Alien, and really most of the characters in Aliens too, the first name is almost always the actor's first name. Not 100%, for example, Hicks wasn't, but typically they let the first name of the actor be the first name of the character, which is kind of a neat little tribute. Anyway, just thought I'd mention that. But yeah, he's kind of king shit, as we talked about in the engineer video a little bit. He runs to the command chair, gets in his chair suit, and tries to take off with a bunch of the chemical on board the Juggernaut, the derelict type ship, and wants to go bomb Earth. One suggestion that's been said that why he's in such a grumpy mood when the movie begins, or when he's released, is that he was actually terminal. Maybe he had a case of the chest burster, or maybe he was a stage 1 anathema, and he had put himself into stasis expecting his fellow engineers to rescue him. He wakes up looking for help, and instead there's these evolved apes in a tin can spaceship asking him for life, and just kind of puts him on the bad foot. Maybe he realizes he just doesn't have much time left. That kind of harkens back to the space jockey from 1979 Alien. It's never said in the film. I mean, he could be infected with something. We just don't know. But it would have been kind of nice to express why he's grumpy. Maybe he's just a mean person. Who knows? But either way, he's kind of king shit. Beats up some humans, takes off on his ship, but then Prometheus itself rams into his ship. And because he's a rugged guy, he survives. That's why he's a little scorched here. Battle damaged, if you will. And at this point, he's just mad. Could he go for one of the other ships on LV-223? Yes, but first he wants to kill all humans. So Bender would be proud. Well, unbeknownst to him, quite so, much earlier in the film, David, on Peter Whalen's orders, had put a small amount of the liquid into Charlie Holloway's drink. So yeah, in his kind of quest for life and finding the black goo, Wayland orders David to do whatever, and he puts a small dab in Holloway's drink, which would kind of ultimately put him on the path to be like this engineer here. Although before it gets too far gone, he asks Vickers to kill him, and that's where the flamethrower scene comes in. But before that, he stooped Elizabeth Shaw. They were partners, still living in sin. They weren't married. She's Catholic, so you know that's how it goes. Oops, you're falling over. But yeah, and this gets into a bizarre kind of life cycle thing here. He has sex with her. She is barren. He gets some goo or the result of the infestations in his blood into her, and then she finds out she's pregnant, and it's growing really quick, and that leads to the med pod scene, which is quite graphic in a Aliens type way. I think it's kind of the chest burster scene of this film. And she does remove the thing from her and throws it in the med pod. So when Mr. Angry Face here comes at her, well, she decides to almost literally unleash the Kraken and what this figure comes with. Meet the so-called Trilobite. Now, when the design originally started off, it looked more like an actual trilobite, which is a prehistoric type of animal, or rather, kind of family series of animals. And the leg falls off. That's okay. They're ball-socketed legs. One of mine's a little loose, but they just plug in. The nice thing is they actually move around a great deal. And they are wire framed too, so you can move them around. And yes, this came out of a human woman. And this is to scale. Kind of makes me wonder, this grew in the med pod. What was it eating to grow so big? Now, this isn't a problem with Prometheus. The same thing could be argued for the original Alien. When the chest burster came out and then it grew within a day or two to its size, what did it eat? Just saying. But yeah, not knowing what else to do to fight the very pissed off and battle damaged engineer, she pops this out of the med pod, and the engineer here is a little surprised because, yeah, this is what he sees. While I don't think this was directly designed by H.R. Giger, his influence is there, and you can't think anything but he would be proud. Because, yeah, it is exactly what you think, including this bit. In the film, this can retract and whatnot. For the figure, it can be unplugged. But why would you want to unplug it when you can do this? And while the engineer figure from NECA has a little bit on the limited articulation, the Trilobite does not. If you wanted to, you could really get this scene correct. Remember how strong the Hammerpedes were? Well, this takes this to 11. It topples the 8+ foot tall, 9 foot tall engineer, and sticks its definitely not a penis into his mouth, effectively becoming a giant face hugger. Or just body hugger, frankly. Its tentacles, whatnot. It's more of a squid. Octopus. Little feet there. But yeah, this was a result of Charlie Holloway at stage 1 infection of the goo, having sex, passing that along, either the goo itself or an organism formed from the goo in his body, into a human, it being removed at roughly 5 months old, and being left in a med pod and attacking an engineer, and quite an interesting scene. I'll give it credit for that. So, yeah, and the fact that these are a set that are sold together and were sold at Toys R Us exclusively. Yeah. Now, once impregnated, of course, the engineer goes into a coma, and this thing just dies like a facehugger. It's a very weird life cycle, I'm not gonna lie. Of course, the argument is it's kind of a proto life cycle, frankly, for what would come next. And this is where the film was intended to start to kind of tie into Alien. So after the engineer is incapacitated, this results in the 2 survivors. Well, 1 and not quite a half, but Elizabeth and David's head connecting, making an alliance, taking one of the other juggernauts off the planet. They're gone. And at the end of the film, the frankly now corpse, unlike with a chest burster where the victim is alive and conscious when it pops out, meanwhile his insides are being eaten out. And then this bursts out, the so-called Deacon. And it uses this spiky head to punch its way out of the chest. And it's a very gangly, spindly creature. Kind of stands on its tippy toes. Does have hands as such. Shoulders on this are weird. Trying to remember where the pivot point is. They go up like that. Well, let's do that. And his head does move a lot on the figure. We even have an opening mouth for that scene where he kind of screams. And this is the kind of the main member of the creature set. This is what it's sold as, the Deacon. You get him, the two Hammerpedes, the two-piece head, and he does come with a stand, but I always have trouble with mine standing on it. I don't know why. He always wants to thump over, so oh well. And this is a proto-alien. It also is kind of showing the whole concept that's been around since at least Alien 3 of the xenomorph combining its DNA, its makeup with the host. So this would be a combination of the Trilobite formed from the goo and engineered DNA to make something like an alien, like a xenomorph, but not quite. It's not really biomechanical. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to have acid blood, even though the hammerheads did. Maybe the passing through a human, because acid would have not been good there, kind of neutralized that aspect. Again, the chemical is pretty volatile and unexpected. He has more fingers than a lot of the traditional xenomorphs, especially from Aliens, the sequel. And again, he walks on his toes, unlike an alien, and no tail. I think it's an interesting design. Of course, he would be young when we see him in the film. No telling what he might grow into. He has kind of that whitish, bluish, translucent skin tone that's been carried throughout the whole Prometheus film. And that's kind of where this part of the cycle leaves off. Next, we will get to Alien Covenant and that cycle. Unfortunately, while it does pick up from here, it's not 100% cohesive, although it does try to drop back into the Aliens line itself, so we'll see how well they did. But that's for next time. Let's wrap this up. So here we have the life cycle of the goo. Best I could lay it out from Prometheus. From the early stages, influence on animal life, through human life, through engineer, and to the Deacon. Of course, it all started because of these vases, ampules, containers. You'd think an advanced alien race would have a little bit better, containment protocol, but maybe I'm wrong. I do like the figures from NECA. They're neat designs. I definitely think the Trilobite is very Giger-esque. And the engineers, as I said in that video, people are not always happy with. I get it. But I do like Fifield as a neat little zombie figure. Horror film. So what do you think? I had a lot of fun making this. I've been wanting to do this for a while, so. Hey, David. Head. But yeah, next time we'll look at Alien Covenant, that life cycle, the so-called neomorph, the proto or predomorph. And then After that, we'll talk about the xenomorph proper and kind of my feelings on if one led to the other or if one's more of a copycat of the other. Spoiler alert, that's kind of what I think. But either way, it's all in good fun. Well, I was recording this while waiting on someone to come pick me up, so he's about here. I better wrap it up. Appreciate you hanging out. As always, if you could, like, share, subscribe. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.